evening, ladies and gentlemen. I understand that you have a rather wide assortment of questions tonight that goes all over the map, which is fine with me. So let's begin. Who wants to present the first question?
Nathan, how important is language in the thinking process?
It depends on what context you're asking that question. In one sense, in an obvious sense, I would say of crucial importance, in that abstract thinking is done by means of concepts, and the chief means by which concepts are symbolized in the mind is by means of words. So that all thinking ultimately has to be expressed in words, and at some point in the thinking process, certainly scientific thinking or thinking about life, thinking about some problems of life, has to at some level find expression in words. However, it's also true that a subverbal level. Now, this is generally recognized, of course, in creative thinking, but it's really true of all thinking, that there is levels of integration and connection that take place beneath the level of words. There's a rather interesting discussion of this in Arthur Koestler's book, The Act of Creation. And he makes a point that other students of the subject have made, that many of the great scientists, for example, such as Einstein, report that at crucial points along the way in struggling with very, very difficult problems, you drop down to a pre-verbal level which can help you, among other things, to escape from perhaps rigid conventional categories that you may have accepted from your intellectual predecessors, and to find some other means of getting more directly at your perceptions of reality and then reconstruct and work your way up again to words that will express your new conclusions. Now, if at no point along the way a person can express himself in words, he's not a clear thinker. But it isn't the case that at every step of the thinking process, it is all happening in terms of grammatical propositions. That's why there isn't a simple or easy answer to your question as I understand it. I think that for most people, learning to think in words more than they do would improve the clarity and the efficacy of their thinking. That, I think, is incontestable and very easily demonstrable, because most people try to solve too much and do too much only by, quote, feel, when it cannot be done. But there will be times when, working with problems, a person gets down to some more primitive subverbal level of making integrations, and then he goes back up into words again. Yes, let's move on. Who's next?
Is the knowledge of such theoretical disciplines as semantics and linguistics valuable in learning to think efficiently?
I don't think so. I think they're interesting subjects. I think they might be worth studying for certain people, but I don't think they're essential. I think that there are many, many people in the world who think very, very efficiently and effectively and clearly without any particular knowledge of semantics or linguistics. Sometimes a knowledge of those fields can help a person to detect errors in thinking, confusions in thinking in particular fields. But I would never take the position that they are vital in order to think efficiently. One proof that they're not is the fact that if people couldn't think efficiently prior to the development of the sciences of semantics and linguistics, how would they ever have got developed?
What do you think of the idea that a basic knowledge of at least one foreign language other than one's native language is essential to clear thinking?
Well, it's obviously not essential. That we can know by common sense, because there are people who think very, very clearly who only have one language, of which, if I may say so, I am one. I certainly think that I think clearly, at least a reasonable amount of the time, to put it more modestly. And I regret the fact that I don't have a second language. I regret the fact that when I was at school and was studying French, I didn't appreciate the future value that I might find in having a second language. I will say that it is desirable, if one has a choice, to have a second language. I think it's especially helpful to a writer. I know just enough of other languages, without really knowing them, to know that when you see other languages coining other terms for concepts for which you know terms in your language, and you see slight overlappings of meanings and certain difference of meanings, it helps you, among other things, to appreciate the relationship between words and concepts, because you have at least two concretes to form an abstraction, your own language and another language. And I think that perhaps to a writer it can be very desirable to have at least one other language. I think that might contribute to his verbal skills, but again, there are beautifully articulate writers who only have one language, so it certainly cannot be called essential. It might only be said to be helpful.
Nathan, will you describe the differences between our abstract knowledge and our felt or realized knowledge? For instance, we may know that we are afraid without allowing ourselves to realize it fully. Or better, we may know abstractly that such and such a course will lead to disaster, without realizing it fully enough to change the course. We may know a lot of things without apprehending their meaning for us. How do these differences develop, and what can we do about them?
Well, I think that at least two different issues seem to be mixed into your question. Let me separate them out. You talk about felt knowledge and what you call realized knowledge. As one category, I think, which you mean to contrast with purely abstract knowledge. Let's take the first issue, abstract knowledge, as you put it, versus felt knowledge. Well, just as there are levels of awareness, as I discussed in the psychology of self-esteem, and as I think most of us will understand, there are levels of reality that our own knowledge can have for us. Now, that is a measure of the extent to which any particular knowledge is integrated into the rest of our knowledge. It can be left hanging in a vacuum inside our brain, so to speak, in which case it's rather disassociated or disconnected from the rest of our knowledge, or it can be very well hooked into the rest of our understanding and integrated with concretes that will be personally meaningful, including emotionally meaningful to us. Now, when a person is very repressed, when he's cut off from his emotions in the way I discuss in the disowned self, one of the consequences is that he knows a great deal, perhaps, but only on an abstract level, with almost no emotional reality for himself of his own knowledge. And sometimes this can reach striking proportions. For example, you can ask a person what he's feeling, and he says, well, I don't know. Then you question him further, and he says, yes, my palms are sweaty, and I observe that my hands are shaking, and now that you ask me, I'm aware that my heart is beating rather rapidly. Oh, I must be afraid. I've actually had this said to me in the course of doing therapy. And the person is speaking, and there's still no emotional integration. He is so cut off from his own body, in just the manner I discussed in the disowned self. He is so numbed physically. His breathing will characteristically be shallow, his muscles will be very tight and tense, so that he has so little ability to feel his own feelings that his own knowledge has for him no emotional reality whatsoever. So one cause of this unreality of knowledge is simply repression, or the disowning process. Now, the other example that you give of knowing that some course of action might be disastrous in its consequences for us, but as you put it, it isn't real to us, there a somewhat different issue is involved. There what I think is involved is to what extent have we concretized the consequences, or have we left them at a generality? For example, some people who read the reports on the danger of smoking and intellectually concede, yeah, smoking is harmful, but they don't stop smoking. It's very unreal. But maybe they see photographs of what cancerous lungs look like. They see what happens to the lungs from repeated smoking. Or they learn what it's like, very concretely and specifically, to die of lung cancer. It all gets very real and concrete. And then maybe some of them have the brains to stop smoking, you see. Now, it has become terribly real. It isn't just a generality. Yeah, one can get lung cancer from smoking.